Hello, I'm Cheryl Craig, and I'm going to be presenting on the topic of getting published and writing research articles. So let's start at the beginning. Here's my topic, and here I am, Cheryl J. Craig. I'm a professor at at Texas A&M University, which is in College Station, Texas, which is sort of in the middle between Austin, Dallas, and Houston. I live closer to Houston. This is one of the few times that I get to speak about my research program, speak about publishing and writing papers without talking about my research program or my research method. So this is a very good time for me to do this. I regularly review about 20 or so Web of Science or Social Science Citation Index or Tier 1 journals. I'm very active as a reviewer. And that gives me a lot of background. And this word collage gives you some ideas about the journals I'm reviewing for. Right now, I serve in editorial capacities with 5 journals. Reflective Practice, I'm on the review board. Teachers and Teaching, Theory and Practice, as well as Teaching and Teacher Education, I'm an executive editor. Frontiers of Teacher Ed, I'm an associate editor. And I am the incoming co-editor of the Journal of Teacher Ed. I also review grants from many nations, and I've put on this map. I've given you some idea of some of the countries' grants that I've had in the last 2 or 3 years. And I want to talk about the questions. Where am I getting these questions for to present? Well, when I make conference presentations, I often have these questions asked of me. I visit graduate classes in my own university, but also around the world. That picture there is from Singapore. Those students ask me some questions. And of course, I sit on round tables for editors at conferences, and people come to your table with lots of questions. And so I'm bookending those questions with my own suggestions. So my presentation is broken into easy peasy parts. First, writing articles. The second one, getting published. So how will I answer these questions that others have asked of me? Here they are. There's lots of them. How do you know what to write about? Why would someone be interested in my research? How do you figure out the literature base and conduct the literature review? And what needs to be concluded in the research methodology section? And how much of my manuscript needs to be dedicated to data presentation? What is an effective introduction and an effective conclusion? What about the references? Do readers really pay attention to them? And what should be in my abstract? So how do you know what to write about? Well, anything that you're feeling really these big tensions, these unresolved questions, things that your research participants bring up, your students bring up, these are all the things that we should be inquiring into, and hopefully they will lead us to some kind of discovery that we did not have before. So how do we know what to write about? Well, usually we try to accumulate research, and then also we're trying to advance research. And sometimes we can do both at the same time. And in addition to that, one of the key forces is discovery. Just something out of the blue that you come up with that you never had before. So why would somebody want to read my research? Well, you were drawn to the topic. Maybe somebody else could too. Others share your interests. There are hundreds of journals that would want to carry your scholarship. And even if you only have 1 or 2 participants, there's lots of people that want to hear really deep research with 1 or 2 participants. And the pearl of great price is to be able to see the research phenomena from a very fine-grained, in-your-face kind of way to a broader landscape kind of way, seeing big, seeing small. And you want to be able to balance discovery and advancement. And so these are all things that you would want to keep in mind. One time I was with Jean Clandin and why would somebody be interested in my research? And she said, if everybody was in the same classroom and we were all doing the same research study, even if there were hundreds of thousands of them, there would be always something left over for someone else to write about. I think basically she's saying the phenomena, we may not see the phenomena at the same time, but we're definitely not the same researchers coming to that phenomena. So we produce different things. And also our studies would be different because we come into different combinations of Schwab scholarship. Some people come in through the milieu or the context. Others are more interested in the subject matter. Some more are in the learners or the students. And if you're like me, you come in through the teacher commonplace. Why would somebody be interested in your research? Because there's always something more to know and know about. And why would somebody be interested? Well, I think this is a fascinating thing. Lee Shulman at Stanford had 2 different doctoral students who worked with the same research participant in the 1980s. And when the research participant was asked which one was true, she said both. There were just different synergies between me and the different researchers. So isn't that interesting? I think that's a very interesting reason why you'd want to research. And then how do you figure out the literature review? Well, you probably have research grants or you're working on team grants and so forth. There always is a lit review in there. So that's always a good place to start. But also that you could start to break out or find the strands that most need to be attended to. And I always maintain that you shouldn't work with more than 4 or 5 strands of literature. So within the 4 or 5 strands, you break it down into subcategories and sub-subcategories. It's a great an organizational tool that your readers and you will appreciate. Here's something that I did. This is very easy within our Pedagogy Through the Pearl Metaphor paper from 2017. The topic one of the topics that we had was teaching metaphors. So what did I do? Instead of just dumping everything into that category, I broke it into novel and stock metaphors and emergent and ascribed metaphors. But look here, we're moving into the Netherlands. They're very well known for the kinds of scoping kinds of literature reviews they're doing. So this was the first review, I think the first comprehensive view of work on teachers' professional identity. And it came out in 2004. So what they did is they started looking between 1988 and 2000, what they're looking for, who started using this in the literature. And of course, you get this swell not only in education, but you have it from other fields as well. And using 2 different search engines, Web of Science came up with 12, ERIC came up with 18, and 5 were the same, which means they were 5 articles that were very prime to use. And they looked at 25 studies, but 3 of them were not useful. And after they read the Lex 22, they decided what they needed to look for some additional groups, and they found them thanks to the reference list by accident. So then they analyzed them and they made it very clear what their units of analysis were. And then based on this, they were able to take everything they found and put it into 3 different categories. So what we have is my example, which is basically taking the notion of metaphor, figuring out the subcategories of metaphor, and presenting it that way in your lit review, versus the Dutch example, which tells you what years they were looking for, how they had used competing search engines to come up with the things, and also how then they turned to the reference list to find some missing pieces of literature. So now we ask what should be in your research method session. Well, you should always have an overview to start, and then name your research tools, and if you have subcategories, name them too. And then also deal with what are the kind of truth claims you're trying to make through your particular work? What would it take for what you say for everybody to think of it as true? And then when you start to read this up, you need to have an introduction to your research methods session. People need to know about your research site, your participants, your researcher, or the research team. They need all this description in order to locate themselves within your study. And always, always, always use visuals and charts to convey lots of information in a small amount of space. Now, how much of my manuscript needs to be dedicated to data presentation? About 33%. Your data is really important. You can't give your conclusions without your data suggesting why those would be trustworthy conclusions. And what about your introduction and conclusion? Well, use different language in your abstract than your introduction. Include your keywords and always weave in your highlights, but employ different expressions. So what I'm talking about is a very internally consistent kind of an introduction package to your article. And what about introductions and conclusions? Well, think of them as bookends. Point to them at the beginning that you hope to have some discovery. These are the things you're going to do. And at the end, be sure to explicitly answer the question about discovery and then talk about how your work adds to the accumulation of literature or of the advancement of particular concepts. And then what about your introduction and conclusion? They should fit together like a pair of gloves, and they should be outgrowths of one another. They should be dialectical. And then we get to references. Do people really need them? Well, the references are a form of genealogy. They're academic genealogy. They show where thoughts, the history of ideas are. They show where they're coming from and whose work we are reading. They also show our intellectual roots. And sometimes people are shy about letting them know, who are your advisors and how do they fit into the scheme of things. And they situate your studies in the national and international literature. Very, very important. Right off from the beginning, oftentimes as a reviewer, I just turn right back to that reference list. And I ask myself, is it an old literature review? Is it too much of a new literature review? Are they missing key foundational pieces? So those are some of the questions as a reviewer I would ask. And what about references again? Well, they can tell, as I mentioned, whether you're parochial and local, but they also can tell you whether you're global and broad-minded. And they like giving points for those two things. And also seasoned researchers use bibliographies to dig into particular ideas where they're not already fleshed out. And so they have to flesh them out through working through different literature reviews to get to their current terms. So let's go back to the Dutch example. We consulted their list of references, and I've told you, now they found an additional group of studies. We found this group of studies by accident, and they added them on. Let's look at abstracts. Well, abstracts are between 5 and 8 sentences. Other people might follow your work based on the abstract. The abstract should invite people into your research and your writing program. And they should give the pertinent information for your topic under study, and they should have an invitational quality to them. I like this advice that Emerald Publishing gives. Use the chronology of your paper and use the headings as guidelines in your writing. And don't get bogged down with unnecessary detail. And you can use your technical language of your discipline in your abstract. Just don't lose people and make it too dense. Make sure what you write flows. And this is one thing I struggle with all the time, is getting the right connecting words. Use an active voice as opposed to a passive voice. And your style of writing should be dense, and your sentences can be longer than usual. Just a few words about abstract. And unstructured abstract is really those 5 to 8 sentences that you would write just off the top of your head that would tell about the study and why it should be compelling for someone to read. Yeah, it might include the years, it might not. It might tell you how many participants and how not. It might tell you the time frame or not. So that makes it very different from the structured abstract. So let's look at structured abstract. I've got up here a piece of my work from 2012, Tensions in Teacher Development and Community, and it has a structured abstract example. So look at in that page, they asked me for background and context, purposes, objectives, research questions, focus of the study, population, participants, and subjects, and research design. You'll notice I wrote a great deal more about research design than I did about the other topics, because my research method, narrative inquiry, is not that well known. So I was given an opportunity there to make it very explicit about what I was doing. Let's move to getting published. And these are some of the things I've learned as an editor. Well, first of all, some of those journals out there are very specific and others are broad. So when you're targeting your journal, don't always worry about the reputation of the journal where you want a high ranking one, but you need to have a good journal that fits your paper's content. You waste time going to the wrong journals. And also you have to remember that journals have special issues. And so they can invite papers at least a year in advance. So if you're interested in a particular topic, isn't being picked up, but it might be kind of leading edge, maybe consider being asked to be part of a special issue. And also these special issues are out there for the grabs about a year ahead. So maybe you want to get out there and suggest that you would edit one of these special interest publications. Now, editors on the boards have very different roles. Now, my roles, they're very different in each journal. Teachers in teaching theory and practice, I was the escalation paper. This is when something's been out there late and finally we've got it in and we have to turn a fast decision. It could be a paper around there which there is a dispute. And then I would be the person that would break the tie on that paper, whether it would be published or not. Now, also, I have been the arbitrator of leading scholars' work. And this is a sort of an issue in the field where those who are very well known expect all of their papers to be published. And unfortunately, not all of them have the same quality or the same interest to the journal. They may be the same quality, but the journal may not be interested in that topic. So I have to write very careful letters about why we're not taking your paper without offending people. I'm a person who nurtures beginning scholars, and I'm a very tolerant and international reviewer. So those are four kind of areas that I naturally drop into. Pretty diverse kinds of things, but I get called on those points. Now, what are the problems I see with submissions? Oh, the big one, it's right off the top. They've got something coming in from, let's say, Kazan, Russia, Russian Federation. And they tell about this incredible project, but they forget the international audience. People in the US do that, people in Canada do it, people in Europe, people in the Middle East and the Eastern countries. They often talk about their projects, but they don't show how those projects would be useful to an international audience. And coupled with that, they forget the international literature, and they fail to adequately describe their methodology. And they may leave out a strand of literature, or they could put so much literature in there, it's totally incomprehensible. One interesting one is that people have a tendency to prevent their findings before they have their data, and oftentimes the data isn't there. And also weak conclusions. I have this problem. I run out of time, and I've run out of energy, and I don't give my ending near the attention that I give my beginning. I have this question asked of me. I've had it asked in Africa. I've had it asked in Italy. Sorry, not Italy. I've had it asked in India, and I've had it asked in China. Are we disadvantaged because we come from countries other than the United States and England? And my answer to that question was, it depends. Some of our journals are out there explicitly trying to be international. They go out of their way to be international. They may put 6 articles in them that each of the 6 have to be different countries are represented. And here's 2 more that are very widely known: Asia Pacific Journal of Ed, Australia Journal of Ed. These welcome manuscripts from all over the world. So what is some personal advice I'd offer authors? Well, when you get those review comments coming in, keep them all and pay attention to them. Because often when I say I have trouble with endings, I just don't have trouble with endings in one paper. I have them in all of them because I'm trying to get out far too fast. You know, I've spent too much time and I don't have any energy left to give it the kind of the send off that it needs. So, you know, I know when I write a paper, I need to have that conclusion singing before I put it in. So that's an example. Another thing I would suggest that you do when you get a revise and resubmit decision, write down and write the letter of those things that you could commit to that they've suggested and those that you can't commit to. And make sure you give good evidence. So, where do we get these ideas? Where does the history of ideas come from? And this is what Ursula Le Guin, deceased, tells us. It's the source, the deep sea where ideas swim. And one catches them in nets and swings them shining into the boat. And Le Guin further said, researchers are always composting in the hope of yielding idea seeds to grow new research stories. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope I've answered some questions that you've been too shy to ask, and I hope I've also given you some food for thought. Thank you again for your kind attention, and I look forward to seeing you elsewhere at this conference, and thank you so much.